Sejumlah negara maju dan berkembang sedang mengalami situasi yang sulit. Inflasi semakin meningkat, salah satunya akibat rantai pasokan pangan dan energi yang terganggu akibat invasi Rusia Ukraina. Lalu bagaimana sebuah negara bisa bertahan agar tidak terseret jurang invasi yang lebih dalam dan keluar dari resesi? Koresponden CNN Indonesia Ruli Kurniawan akan membahasnya bersama Managing Director International Monetary Fund atau IMF, Kristalina Georgieva. Berikut wawancaranya.
Managing Director International Monetary Fund, thank you so much for your time with CNN Indonesia today. So, how are
pleasure.
you?
Very happy to be in Indonesia, very happy to be in Bali.
Yeah,
beautiful.
Glad to hear that. So I'm going to kick off the question by asking about inflations. High inflations becomes a major problem in most emerging and developing countries. So how does IMF support its members in harnessing their capital flows to fight inflations without impairing the recovery?
We do recommend central banks to act decisively to throw cold water on this heating of prices, because if they don't, that affects people's incomes and it affects the foundation for growth.
Yes.
In that regard, we strongly support actions that have been taken, and it is important to recognize that since 2021, the middle of the year, when inflation started showing that it could be a problem, central banks in emerging markets have been the fastest to act.
Okay.
And we have seen since then, on average, almost 4 increases of rates per country, which is calming somewhat the fears that inflation can de-anchor, in other words, run faster than we can catch it up. But clearly still more needs to be done. Of course, when inflation is high, major central banks, the Fed, the European Central Bank, they raise interest rates, and that attracts capital to go to a safer place. Since the beginning of the year, over $50 billion have left emerging markets and developing economies. This is as much as it has gone into these economies for the whole of last year.
Yeah.
So capital outflows is an issue. What the IMF does is to advise countries how to most appropriately deploy their policies to buffer their economies and protect from risks of capital flows hurting their own growth. We have come up with a integrated policy framework. This is, think of all instruments you have, and then we are working with countries for the most appropriate response. That means that if capital outflows are threatening to destabilize a country, then there could be capital flow measures put in place.
Yes. All right. Okay. So we're talking about inflations. Now we're talking about recessions. It's, like we heard it a lot nowadays. So, in your point of view, how to prevent a deep recession? Because we know some countries are facing higher debts.
Let me start by saying that while we are going to downgrade our growth projections for a third time since the beginning of the year, we are still expecting growth in 2022 to be positive. In a small number of countries like Ukraine, Russia, it is negative. They are shrinking, but majority of countries we expect to be registering positive growth.
Right.
We are more concerned about 2023. Why? Because the tightening of financial conditions is starting to bite, and it may slow down growth more. But even so, we don't see a deep recession. It would be rather some economies falling in recession, but maybe not the whole world. Now, this being said, you're right that countries have to focus on how they can protect themselves better. Well, 3 things. 1, do concentrate on inflation, because if you don't, you're undermining your growth prospects. Two, be sure that monetary policy and fiscal policy don't clash.
Yes, it's not match.
That they work hand in hand.
Right.
When monetary policy tightens, that means people suffer, and fiscal policy then comes to help.
Yes.
But this help has to be very well targeted. Don't provide subsidies to everybody, because rich people don't need it. Use your fiscal space to really help the most vulnerable people. And three, remember that the best way to get growth is structural reforms. Make sure that there is a good investment climate,
Yes.
that businesses can quickly register and create employment, and then look at the small businesses where there may be more need for help.
Okay. Well, Ibu Kristalina Georgieva, thank you very much for your insights, and hope you have a very pleasant time here in Indonesia. Stay healthy and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.